Tuesday, Greg Heffley first begins writing in his journal. Monday, after finishing his first journal, Greg begins writing in a second one. Monday, Greg reconciles with Riley after a long argument they had. Saturday, a fight in Greg's neighborhood ceases as a driver runs over children with a snowplow. Hey everyone, Myets here. There aren't a ton of things I hate. I like lots of different things, and if I'm not a huge fan of something, I at least think it's okay. But there is one thing that I'm very passionate about, and that is the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series. These books were a massive part of my childhood, and even now I view the majority of these books as incredible, except for a couple, but especially one. There's a book in the series that spits in the face of everything that Diary of a Wimpy Kid is about, and that is Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Deep End. If you want to know how much I hate this book, I made a video a while back ranking all of the Wimpy Kid books, and I decided for the fun of it to include the movies. And it was at the very bottom, below even the Long Haul movie. And for those unaware, the Long Haul movie is easily the most despised thing in the entire franchise by the fans. I don't like the Long Haul either, but I'd say watching the Long Haul movie is like watching a YouTube cringe compilation, while reading The Deep End is like watching your house get caught up in flames. Reading this book as a Wimpy Kid fan just makes you miserable. So let's get right into it. The Heffleys are living with their grandma after the events of the prior book, and oh no, oh gosh. I have to talk about the ending of Wrecking Ball. We're only one page in and I'm already upset. Okay, let's quickly talk about Wrecking Ball. The Heffleys get some inheritance money, they spend it to add an addition to their house, but things go awry and the addition has to be torn down. Susan by this point is so upset that she decides it's better to move. They find people who want their house, and they've planned the place that they're going to move to, and so far the book is alright, with only a couple of problems here and there, and honestly, the Heffleys moving would provide a well-needed feeling of change in the series, since at this point in the books, things have been feeling super stagnant. But then, as the Heffleys are moving out, a large mess of things begin happening at once, and this leads to the Heffleys' hot tub falling through 3 stories of their house. 3 stories! So now the Heffleys can't move as the buyers don't want their house, and that's why they're now living in Grandma's house. So yeah, that's for sure a normal way to set up a story. Anyway, the Heffleys are miserable, just like me reading this, since they have to live in the basement. That is until they get a call from Gammy. She tells them that she wants Uncle Gary's camper out of her driveway, and that if they want, they can take it. I will give this book right now one positive, probably the only positive I'll be giving in this video, and that's the fact that the beginning of the book does bring back and reference quite a few characters from the series, and with the majority of them, this is as of now their final appearance. These characters are Grandma, Sweetie, Gammy, and Uncle Gary. It's really neat seeing some of the supporting cast here, since at a lot of points in the modern books, Diary of a Wimpy Kid has felt very separated from the rest of the series, and so the Heffleys buy camping gear and head on the trip in the camper. Complaining time's back, everyone! The 9th book, The Long Haul, was about a road trip vacation. The 12th book, The Getaway, was about a resort vacation. The Deep End is the 3rd vacation story in 6 books. And this book is basically just a combination of the two. At first, a vacation story was a good idea, but now at this point it just feels lazy. It's as if these vacation stories are happening just so that there's an excuse for it to not be any reoccurring characters. But to me, it also feels like this is all happening so that we can witness the wacky hijinks that the Heffleys get themselves into, even though that's not really what makes the series interesting. Speaking of which, countless cases of wacky hijinks ensue. The Heffleys decide to take a detour at a lake, but they end up getting attacked by fish in the water, and it turns out that the Heffleys accidentally went swimming in a fish hatchery. The Heffleys make a mistake when they park 2 more times. One is parking on someone's farm, and a second time parking in a little league baseball field. Meanwhile, I'm making a mistake by deciding to read this book. The Heffleys decide to try something different, so they head to a place called the Family Adventure Center. This place has tons of activities, but they're only able to do one due to Manny's height, that being the fun float, where you went down a nearby river in inner tubes. This ends up being extremely boring until Greg hits a rough spot in the water and falls out of the tube. He's now stuck in a shallow part of water where he can't get up without the risk of slipping. Greg tries to get help, but this ends up not working. Greg decides to try and paddle his way out of the water, but the water ends up sending him even further downstream. And now Greg is hanging onto a branch so that he doesn't go even further. Things of course get worse though when Greg's swimsuit falls off and into the water. A person that works at the center comes to help Greg, but Greg is terrified of them seeing him, so Greg decides to let go and just go down the stream. This all ends with Greg eventually being found by his family, covering himself with a cooler. One of the biggest issues I have in this story is just how comically unrealistic all these events are. Diary of a Wimpy Kid used to be a fairly realistic series, the point being that anything that happened in the books could be plausible in real life. It's what makes the stories in these books so relatable. And while some of the things here are possible to happen in real life, they all happen back to back to back, and you can just feel that the realism in the series just doesn't matter anymore. And now, let's move on, but trust me, we'll come back to this later. The Headleys decide to go to a camping site, and here we see Greg turning into a rabid animal after getting lost in the woods for a few minutes. And I'm about to say this right now, this video is scripted, this section is not in my script. I just want to talk about another issue, which I just remembered right now, and that's the fact that they make Greg really dumb. The thing is with the early books, whenever Greg got into an issue, it was due to him being selfish, not to him being stupid. Because there are quite a few times in the earlier books where Greg is shown being pretty clever sometimes, but things just don't work out due to his hubris. That, and also the fact that Greg is extremely lazy. For example, in the second book, Greg could have very easily done his history project, but due to how lazy he is, not due to how dumb, he held it off until the last moment. But yeah, Greg is stupid now. Consistency doesn't matter, I guess. Let's keep going. Frank almost gets set on fire with a marshmallow. I'm going to be honest, every word I'm saying here feels like I'm making it up, but this is exactly what happens in the book. And lastly, a bear begins attacking the camper with the Heffleys inside it. So Manny uses a flare that they bought at the store and sets it off, scaring away the bear. The Heffleys are then kicked out for being reckless with the flare, and I want to talk about this a bit. The point of a flare gun is to use it in the case of an emergency, and I think being attacked by a bear is a case of emergency. They probably should have told the people at the campsite about the bear attacking them, or maybe you could have it that they did tell them about the bear, but the people just didn't believe them, which leads to them getting kicked out anyway. That would have been way more interesting, as it shows how things can sometimes be unfair, a lesson shown prominently throughout the early series. Instead, they just leave without ever trying to explain themselves, because I guess who needs logic? Not this book, apparently. The Heffleys then find out about this RV park called Campers Eden, which, guess what? We're spending the entire rest of the book here. So you better hope you find this place more interesting than I do. They head there, entering through the one bridge used to enter and exit the place, as it is surrounded by a lake. Okay, once again, I'm going off script here. Why is there one bridge to enter the entire place? When you go through the book, you see that there are a ton of people here. The person who designed this place should be fired. Why would there be one entrance to the entire place that can get easily destroyed? They just really didn't think this through. Anyway, this will be brought up again later. This book has the absolute genius and revolutionary idea of copying The Getaway by showing a place that looks cool at first, but in reality isn't that great. One thing to note is that skunks are probably common here, as there's a skunk alarm when one appears. Said skunk proceeds to eat the food the Heffleys had made, causing the area around their camper to stink. A lot of things that couldn't matter less than the grand scheme of the universe happen, and eventually, we get the first proper main thing to happen at Isla de Trajedales. While using a canoe, the Heffleys are attacked by teens launching watermelons out of a slingshot. I'll just let you take that in for a second. Alright, we're good now. This will matter very soon. It's impressive how this book has every single one of the worst tropes in the series. The trope I'm talking about is a group of characters who appear in one book and then are never referenced again. It happens a few times, such as in Old School, The Meltdown, and Double Down, although those cases are infinitely better than what we have here. Susan forces Greg to hang out with this group of kids. Their names are Juicebox, Big Marcus, Weevil, Doo-Doo, Fivehead, Cutter, and Regular Marcus, but we can just call them the most one-note characters in all of fiction. When they ask Greg his name, he makes up something since everyone else is using nicknames. The teens from before launch watermelons at them, so they plan to get their revenge. They attack the teens with water guns, but it only really aggravates them, so the group uses soda, mustard, and ketchup on them the next time. And due to the use of those substances, the teens get attacked by bees and the group hides. Later on though, the rest of the group is tricked by the camp's director and they get into trouble, but the group pins the whole thing on Greg, who wasn't there. So now obviously Greg wants to stay in the camper so that he doesn't end up being caught, but things get way worse when a thunderstorm happens, causing the bridge to be destroyed, meaning no one can get in and no one can get out. To make matters worse, the Heffleys get sprayed by a skunk. Do you guys remember when the conflicts in this series were character driven? Instead of Jeff Kinney throwing whatever random thing he could think of at the Heffleys? Yeah, me too. The place is now a complete mess as everyone is trying to get as many supplies as they can get. The campsite is practically falling apart as people fight for what's left. Once again, a friendly reminder, this is a Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. The Heffleys decide that enough is enough, and Greg hatches a plan. There's a part of the water that is shallow, and if they push the RV over, they might be able to get across. So they push the camper down the hill and get in it as it makes its way to the water. They reach the shallow part, and it seems they're gonna make it, but they get stuck on a rock, and part of the camper that seems significant comes off. Things are immediately going downhill. The septic tank in the camper explodes due to the sewage hookup being underwater. The camper starts to fill with water, so the Heffleys get on top of the RV, and we get the worst moment in the whole series. The Heffleys see the car seats are in the water, so they jump down and cling onto them. Everyone except for Manny. Manny, you see, decides to steer the car, and this somehow leads to the car lodging in perfectly into the area of the bridge that got destroyed. Imagine the infinite possibilities where this could have gone wrong. There is no way a 3-year-old could steer and get such a precise angle right. What if the bridge was too high, or if the gap was too big and the car just went by? What if the gap was just too small and the car just crashed into the side of the bridge? What if any form of logic was used here instead of whatever this is? The suspension of disbelief in this book is in complete and utter shambles. After this, Manny uses the flare again, with people using the newly fixed bridge to leave the campsite. And after that, the Heavleys spend a perfect time there now that everyone's gone. Which is super odd, isn't it? Diary of a Wimpy Kid has never been a series to follow very traditional storytelling. Most endings in the Wimpy Kid series are ironic positive or ironic negative. That means that the books usually have endings which aren't the greatest outcome for the characters, but it still feels like they gained something by the end. Here though, we just have a generic and then everyone lived happily ever after ending, and it just goes to show how little this feels like a Wimpy Kid book. That's the end of the book. Now I just want to dive in a bit more on why I hate it so much. This book harbors every single one of the worst aspects of the modern Diary of a Wimpy Kid franchise. When Diary of a Wimpy Kid first came out, it was so special because there really weren't any children's books that had main characters like Greg Heffley, and especially not ones like Greg where he doesn't learn his lesson by the end. And what makes Wimpy Kid so special is how realistic it was. Greg didn't just change immediately at the end of the story. Greg's development across the first 8 or so books was very subtle, and another thing that showed the realism of the series was how the world of the books felt. There's a sizable group of supporting characters who appeared every once in a while, and while they didn't play any huge roles, they really helped with making the world feel more lived in. But then, later on in the series, recurring characters slowly started fizzling out, and worst of all, Greg kinda just lost his personality. One major point in the early books was that the majority of things that happened to Greg were his fault, although it was a combination of that and things that weren't. That was done because it condemns Greg's actions without being in your face about it. But there is not a single thing in this book that happens which feels like it's Greg's fault. So you start to really feel bad for Greg, which goes against the point of the series. Also, none of these characters have a personality anymore. Susan just plays a stereotypical mom with nothing else of note. I can't even think of a single thing Frank and Roderick do in this book. And Manny is shown as being able to do all these insanely unrealistic things just because it's funny apparently. There used to be so much when it came to these characters, but now there's nothing of note to them. It feels like the series just completely ignores what makes it special. Instead of focusing on the characters and their dynamics with each other, Jeff Kinney just decides to write about the wacky scenarios these cartoon characters get themselves into. And it's honestly really sad because Diary of a Wimpy Kid used to be very special, but now it just feels like all the other books. Man, this ending is a real downer, isn't it? I will end it off with one positive though. I personally believe this is the last bad Wimpy Kid book to be released. Big Shot and Diaper Overload bring back a lot of old characters, and while there's still some moments that feel over the top, the series does feel like it's dialing down the insanity. And I definitely love some of the additions they make with certain characters, as they actually feel like they're developing these characters again after so long. So I am definitely excited for the new Wimpy Kid book this year, no brainer. And I really hope it keeps up the pace the series has been recently getting into. This book still sucks though. See you all in the next one.